My brother yelled. That position was supposed to be mine. After I accepted the offer he never earned. When Dad destroyed my car to teach me a lesson, I dialed 911 and said, "Now you can explain it to them." The job offer came in on a Tuesday morning while I was sitting in my car outside a dentist office, waiting for a callback about a crown I could not afford to delay. I almost ignored the email because I assumed it was another polite rejection. I had been applying for months and getting nowhere. Then I saw the subject line and had to read it twice. It was from a regional operations manager at a company I had interviewed with 3 weeks earlier. They wanted to offer me the position. Not a maybe, not a second interview, an actual offer. I sat there in the parking lot with my phone in my hand and just stared at the screen like it had to be a mistake. The salary was better than anything I had ever made. The benefits were real. The hours were decent. The work was boring in the best possible way. I remember feeling this weird mix of relief and dread because I knew exactly what it would mean at home. My brother Marcus had been talking about that same position for almost a year, not because he deserved it, because he had convinced our dad that it was his next big thing. Marcus had this way of turning every opportunity into a family prophecy. He was always the one who was supposed to be moving up, getting noticed, and finally making everyone proud. Dad bought into that completely. I was the other son, the dependable one, the one who fixed things, paid bills on time, and rarely made noise. That sounds noble until you realize it usually just means people overlook you. Even at work, I had spent years being the guy who stayed late, trained new people, covered shifts, and never complained. The interview had actually happened because one of the managers remembered me from a contract job I had done 2 years earlier. When they reached out, I did not tell anyone right away. I needed to be sure. I needed to read the offer fully. I needed to know the start date, the pay, the probation terms, the background check, all of it. My life had taught me not to celebrate too early, so I sat in that parking lot and accepted the offer through the portal while my hands were shaking. Then I called my mother first. Not because she was the safest person to tell, but because she was usually the first to know everything anyway. She sounded happy for about 5 seconds. Then she asked whether I had mentioned it to Marcus yet. That told me everything I needed to know. I told her I had not. She sighed like I had just created a problem by getting hired. She said Marcus had been under a lot of pressure lately and that I should be careful how I brought it up. I remember looking through my windshield at the dentist office sign and thinking that maybe I should have stayed unemployed forever just to keep everyone calm. But the offer was real, and I had worked hard for it, and I was tired of pretending my life did not count because it made other people uncomfortable. So I accepted. I should have known that telling my family would turn my good news into an emergency. That afternoon, I went to my parents' house for dinner because it was my dad's birthday and skipping would have caused its own argument. Marcus was already there when I arrived. He was pacing in the kitchen with his sleeves rolled up, acting like he was in the middle of something important. He had the same look he always got when he wanted attention and had not gotten it yet. My dad was at the table opening a bottle of beer. My mom was setting down food and moving around everyone like a peacekeeper in a war she had helped create. I told them about the offer after dinner, right when the plates were still on the table. I tried to say it casually. I said I had accepted a position and I would be starting in 2 weeks. The silence lasted only a second. Then Marcus asked what the position was. When I told him, his face changed so fast I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so open and immediate that he did not even have time to hide it. Dad looked confused at first, then proud, then confused again when Marcus stood up so quickly his chair scraped the floor. Marcus said I had to be joking. He said that position had been his. He said he had been working toward it for months. He said I knew it. I told him I did not know anything except that I had interviewed for it, passed the process, and been offered the job. He said that was not how it was supposed to go. That sentence stuck with me, not because it was smart, because it revealed everything. He did not say I had stolen anything. He did not say I was unqualified. He said it was not how it was supposed to go, like the universe had made a scheduling mistake, like the world owed him a result. Dad asked what Marcus meant by that. Marcus launched into this whole story about how he had sent in an application months earlier, how he had networked with someone in the company through a friend, how he had been waiting on a callback, and how the manager had clearly known his name. I already knew enough about the process to recognize the lie. The company had never contacted him. I knew because I had asked around in my own carefully cautious way after the interview. The manager who hired me had no idea who Marcus was, but I did not say that yet. I just sat there and listened. Marcus kept getting louder. He said I always did this. He said I always slid into things after he had laid the groundwork. He said I had no loyalty. Dad started nodding along faster than I expected. That was the part that hurt more than Marcus yelling. Dad did not ask one actual question. He just assumed there had to be some version of events in which Marcus was the wronged man. And I was the opportunist. I tried to explain that I had gone through the process normally. I said I had not even known Marcus was interested in the role. Marcus interrupted and said I was lying. My mom asked everyone to calm down. Nobody calmed down. Dad said Marcus had talked about that job for months and had been counting on it. I pointed out that talking about a job and applying for one are not the same thing. That did not help. Marcus said I was being smug. That word got thrown at me a lot in my family whenever I refused to absorb blame for other people's failures. The rest of the night went downhill quickly. My dad said I should have told Marcus before I accepted anything. I told him I was not required to ask permission to take a job. He said family should look out for family. I said I had looked out for myself for years, and that had never seemed to bother anyone when I was the one helping them. That made things worse. By the time I left, Marcus had gone from furious to icy. Dad had gone from confused to offended. My mother looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I drove home with my jaw locked so hard my teeth hurt. For 2 days I heard nothing. Then my mother texted me that Marcus had not been sleeping and that Dad was disappointed in how I handled the situation. I did not answer right away. I was too busy preparing for the background check and filling out onboarding forms. I should say here that I had already spent most of my adult life being the family member who fixed problems. Marcus had borrowed money from me and not paid it back. Dad had used my truck without asking and returned it with the gas light on. Mom had asked me to help cover bills when things got tight. I had always said yes because saying no in that house was treated like an act of betrayal. There was a family culture of soft coercion. Nobody screamed all the time. That would have been easier. It was more like guilt, disappointment, and selective memory. Whenever Marcus needed something, he got a speech about how talented he was and how hard life had been on him. Whenever I needed something, I got practical advice and a reminder that nobody was going to hand me anything. The problem was that I had eventually started believing that maybe that was fair. Maybe Marcus really was the one who needed more help. Maybe I was supposed to be the stable one who stayed in the background. Then the offer came, and suddenly I was not in the background anymore. I was in the way. The job started in 2 weeks, and I used that time to get my things in order. I updated my direct deposit. I bought a cheap button-up shirt because most of my work clothes were either too worn or too casual. I even started keeping careful copies of my documents in a folder on my laptop and in an envelope at home because I had learned long ago that people in my family liked to move papers around when they were upset. The first sign that something was off came a week after the dinner. I got a message from the hiring manager asking whether I could confirm some details Marcus had apparently shared with the company. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I called the manager directly. He sounded polite and a little embarrassed. He said Marcus had reached out claiming there had been a misunderstanding and that he, Marcus, had been the one intended for the role. I asked how Marcus even knew who to contact. He said Marcus had apparently guessed based on the company website and a few names connected through LinkedIn. That told me Marcus had not just been angry, he had been fishing. He had somehow found the manager, tried to insert himself into my hiring, and then acted like he had been displaced from a plan that never existed. The manager asked whether I wanted to withdraw. I said absolutely not. Then I asked whether my application and interview notes could be preserved in case there were any further issues. He said yes, and suddenly I was glad I had kept my composure during the first conversation because I knew I was going to need a paper trail. The manager also mentioned that Marcus had represented himself as having already completed part of the process. That was not true. He had not even made it to a formal interview. He had sent a message, gotten ignored, and decided reality needed to catch up. I told the manager I would provide whatever documentation he needed. Then I forwarded every email, every interview confirmation, every follow-up note, and the original offer letter. I also started saving screenshots of family texts, not because I wanted drama, because I had a bad feeling. That feeling got worse 3 days later when Marcus showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked worn out, not guilty, worn out. There is a difference. He said he wanted to talk. I let him in because I thought maybe he had cooled off enough to act like an adult. He did not apologize. He spent 10 minutes talking around the issue until I finally got him to say what he wanted. He wanted me to turn the job down so he could reapply. He said I had the advantage because the company already knew my name. He said I could help him get back on track. I asked him why he thought the company would want to rehire someone who had never been hired in the first place. He acted insulted that I was being technical. That was Marcus in a nutshell. He could make a moral argument out of pure fantasy and then get offended when the numbers refused to cooperate. I asked him whether he had actually applied before I did. He said yes. I asked him to show me. He said he did not keep every receipt like I did. That was funny because it was exactly the sort of careless thing he always mocked me for. When I asked whether he had proof, he changed the subject and started talking about Dad. He said Dad was furious with me. He said Dad felt humiliated by how I embarrassed the family. I told him nobody had embarrassed the family except the two of us by standing in my living room arguing over a job I had earned. That ended the visit. He left angry. I went back to organizing my papers. The next day, my mom called and asked whether I could come by with some paperwork for Dad. That should have been the end of the story, but I had already learned enough to know that when my family asked for paperwork, they usually meant they wanted leverage. Still, I went. Dad was in the garage when I arrived. He had my old high school trophies on a workbench for some reason, which immediately made me suspicious because he had no reason to be touching anything of mine. Mom was in the kitchen and looked tired. She told me Dad wanted to discuss the situation like adults. That sounded promising until Dad came in with that stiff, controlled energy he used when he thought he had been disrespected. He said Marcus had been under a lot of strain, and that I had handled the job situation selfishly. I said I had applied for a position and accepted a valid offer. He said I was refusing to see the bigger picture. I asked him what the bigger picture was. He said Marcus was in a hard place and needed this opportunity more than I did. That was the first time I realized this was not really about the job. It was about status. Marcus had spent years being treated like the golden child, even though he rarely followed through on anything. He talked big, failed quietly, and then got rescued before the consequences stuck. I had been the one who actually paid my own bills, fixed my own car, and showed up when asked. Apparently, that made me the easiest person to sacrifice. I told Dad the job was mine and that I was not giving it up. His face hardened. He said I had changed. I said maybe I had just stopped pretending to be grateful for being overlooked. That was the wrong thing to say. Dad stepped past me, opened the garage cabinet, and started pulling things out like he was looking for an answer in the clutter. I had no idea what he was doing until he walked toward the driveway and asked where I had parked. My car was in the driveway because the street was full. It was an older Honda, not fancy, but I had kept it running through discipline and cheap parts, and a lot of evenings under a hood I barely understood. I asked what he was doing. He said he needed to teach me a lesson about respect. I thought he was bluffing. Then he picked up a heavy steel pipe from the garage and started smashing the passenger side window. The sound was so sharp and sudden that for a second my brain refused to accept it. He hit the windshield next, then the mirror, then the hood. I rushed forward, but Mom grabbed my arm and screamed at me not to make it worse. I still remember how unreal it felt, like something had tipped out of the world and nobody else cared. Dad was shouting about family obligation and how I would not learn unless something important was taken away. I saw Marcus standing in the doorway, watching. He was not helping. He was not stopping Dad. He just stood there with his mouth tight and his arms crossed like he was observing the results of a science experiment. That image burned into my head. The moment that really changed everything was when Dad slashed one of the tires with a utility knife and told me that if I thought I was too good for family, then family would remind me what mattered. I stopped arguing after that. I pulled my phone out and called 911. I did not scream. I did not cry. I told the dispatcher that my father was actively destroying my car, that I was in the driveway, and that I needed officers to come immediately because the situation was escalating. Dad looked shocked, then furious. Marcus finally moved, but only to start yelling that I was overreacting. I told the dispatcher that my father had a metal pipe and a knife, and that I was afraid the confrontation would turn physical. That got results fast. Dad suddenly realized this was no longer a family matter. It was a police matter. He tried to hand me the pipe like that would somehow undo the call. He said I was ruining everything. I told him he had already done that. Then I said the only thing that came out of my mouth in that moment that felt fully true. Now you can explain it to them. The officers arrived within minutes. 2 patrol cars, lights flashing. One officer stayed with me while the other separated Dad and Marcus near the garage. Dad tried to explain it as a family dispute. Marcus tried to say I had provoked him by disrespecting the household. I handed the officer my phone and showed him the damage as it was happening. I also showed him the text messages from my mom asking me to bring paperwork, the earlier messages about Marcus being upset, and the hiring manager's email chain in which Marcus had tried to interfere with the job process. The officer asked if my car was registered in my name. I said yes. He asked if there had ever been any dispute over ownership. I said no. Then he asked if I wanted to press charges. That question forced me to slow down. I looked at my dad, who was now pretending to be a victim. I looked at Marcus, who had finally stopped acting angry and started acting scared. I looked at my mom, who seemed like she might cry from the ceiling. I realized that for years I had been choosing peace by absorbing damage. This time the damage was visible. It was hard to argue with broken glass. I said yes, I wanted a report. The officer asked whether I had any camera footage. I did. That was the part nobody expected. A few months earlier, after a string of minor thefts in the neighborhood, I had installed a basic security camera facing the driveway because packages kept disappearing and I was tired of guessing. It had not been expensive. It had a motion alert and stored clips to the cloud. I remembered it only because one of the officers asked whether there had been any witnesses besides family. I told him there might be footage. He asked me to check. I pulled up the app right there on the hood of the patrol car. The clip was clear enough to make everyone go silent. It showed Dad grabbing the pipe. It showed Marcus standing in the doorway. It showed Dad hitting the car repeatedly. It also showed Marcus walking out of frame only after the worst of it was done, not before. He had watched. He had not intervened. The officer copied the footage and told me it would matter. Dad tried to backpedal immediately. He said he had only wanted to scare me. He said it was discipline. He said it was a father correcting a son who had gone too far. The officer did not look impressed. He explained that destruction of property was still destruction of property. He also explained that using tools like a pipe and knife changed the situation in ways that were not helping Dad at all. Marcus kept saying it was a misunderstanding. The problem was that the camera did not misunderstand. Neither did the broken windshield. I spent the next hour answering questions, filling out a statement, and taking photos of the damage with the officer. My mother cried quietly on the porch. Dad was furious but had moved from aggressive to cornered. Marcus finally stopped looking at me like I had stolen something and started looking at the ground. By the time the officers left, Dad had been warned not to contact me directly until things were sorted out and the report had been filed. I had my car towed the next day. The estimate came back at just under $4,000. That was more than I could comfortably handle without dipping into savings. I was angry, but I was also strangely calm. The camera footage and police report were real. That mattered more than my feelings in that moment. I filed the report with my insurance company. Because the damage was intentional and because the police report named my father, the claim process turned into a mess very quickly. The adjuster asked for copies of everything. I sent the footage, the report, the estimate, and the photos. Then I called a lawyer my coworker recommended. I did not go in expecting a dramatic lawsuit. I went in because I wanted to know what my options were before my family tried to rewrite the story. The lawyer was blunt in a way I appreciated. He said I had a strong paper trail. He also said that family disputes often get uglier when money, employment, and property are involved. He advised me not to speak to anyone about the incident without keeping notes. I started a folder on my laptop and a notebook on my desk. Every call, every message, every cost, every date. I documented it all. Meanwhile, the family fallout got uglier exactly as predicted. My mother kept calling to say Dad was ashamed and that I should consider dropping the report because things had already gone too far. Marcus started sending messages that alternated between blaming me and acting wounded. One message said I had turned a private family issue into a police matter. Another said Dad had been stressed and I should understand. Then another message tried to remind me that we were brothers and should support each other. I did not answer any of them emotionally. I saved them. Then I blocked Marcus for a few days when the messages became more repetitive and manipulative. The job offer still stood. The background check went through. I started the position the Monday after the car incident. That was a strange week. I was walking into a new job with a broken car in the shop, a police report in my folder, and a family meltdown in my inbox. But the job itself felt like stepping into a different universe. Nobody there knew my family history. Nobody cared that I was the calm one or the dependable one or the one who was supposed to be grateful for scraps. They cared whether I showed up on time, learned the systems, and followed through. I was good at that. For the first time in a long time, being competent was enough. 2 days after I started, the hiring manager asked whether there was any reason my brother had been calling the office line again. That was another ugly surprise. Marcus had apparently found the general office number and left a message trying to explain that there had been a mistake in the hiring process. He claimed he was a better fit. He claimed he had more experience. He claimed I had manipulated the process by not mentioning family connections. I had to sit down when I heard that. I asked the manager if he wanted me to handle it. He said no, but he appreciated the heads up and would route future calls through HR. That was the moment I realized Marcus was still trying to claw the job back even after the car incident. It was not just jealousy. It was obsession. I did not tell my family about the office call. I just kept working. 3 days later, HR asked me to come in because they had received an external complaint implying favoritism in the hiring process. The complaint had no merit, but they wanted a record. I was glad I had kept every email. I brought printed copies of the original application, the interview invite, the offer letter, the acceptance confirmation, and the time-stamped correspondence. I also brought the police report just in case things got weird enough for someone to ask why my family was suddenly involved in my work life. The HR manager reviewed everything and looked genuinely annoyed on my behalf. She said the process had been standard and that the complaint would go nowhere. Then she asked whether I wanted the company to issue a formal no-contact notice if the behavior continued. I said yes. They documented it. That was the first real professional victory in the whole mess. The complaint got dismissed. The role stayed mine, and now there was a company record showing Marcus had tried to interfere after the fact. That mattered later. My mother was the first family member to show up in person after the police report. She came to my apartment with a container of food and that exhausted look she got whenever she knew there was no clean way to fix what had happened. She kept saying that Dad had gone too far. Then she kept saying he had been pushed too far. Those two ideas kept fighting each other in her voice. I let her sit down. I did not yell. I told her I understood that she was trying to keep the family together, but that I was no longer interested in pretending property destruction was just a misunderstanding. That seemed to hit her hard. She asked whether I was really going to make my father pay. I told her that I was making him answer for what he did, which was different. I also told her something I had never said out loud before. I said I had spent my entire adult life being told that peace mattered more than fairness, and it had turned me into the easiest person in the room to push around. She started crying after that, not dramatically, just silently. She admitted that Dad had always seen Marcus as the one with potential and me as the one who would be fine no matter what. I had already known that, but hearing it from her still hurt. She also admitted that Marcus had told her the job was basically his, before I ever accepted it. That meant the whole family had been living in a fantasy version of events before I had even taken my first step into reality. I asked whether Marcus had actually applied. She looked away and said she did not know for sure. That was her answer to everything difficult. I do not know for sure. Eventually, she left with most of the food untouched. After that, the police report and insurance claims started moving in the background. A detective called once to confirm details because of the knife and the scale of the damage. My lawyer told me that if Dad was convicted, or if he accepted a diversion agreement, the insurance company could still pursue him for reimbursement under subrogation. That sounded complicated, but the basic point was simple. My father was not just angry. He was now financially exposed. That changed the tone of the conversations very quickly. Dad called from a number I almost ignored because I did not want to hear another speech about respect. He sounded different, not apologetic exactly. More measured. He said he wanted to make things right. He said the police had scared him. He said he did not understand how a family argument had become a report. I told him it became a report when he picked up a pipe. He paused after that. Then he said he had never meant to destroy the car. I said the windshield disagreed. He asked whether we could settle it privately. I said no. I told him to speak to my lawyer if he wanted to discuss anything. That phrase landed differently than I expected. It shut him up. He was used to being able to retreat into fatherhood when he got cornered. Lawyer made this real. It made him one party in a dispute, not the ruler of it. Marcus called the next day and left a long voicemail that was basically a variation on the same theme. He kept saying I was escalating things. He kept saying Dad had made a mistake. He kept saying the job was supposed to help both of us somehow, which was one of the weirdest things I had ever heard, because it made no sense at all. I listened to the voicemail once and saved it. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer. At that point, I had enough. The bigger question in my mind was not whether I had the job anymore. I obviously did. It was whether I wanted to keep orbiting a family that functioned by rewriting reality until one person gave in. The answer started to become clear the more paperwork arrived. The insurance claim processed enough of the damage that I was able to get the car repaired, though I had to pay a deductible and wait longer than I wanted. I used ride shares and borrowed a coworker's help a couple times, which embarrassed me more than I expected. There is a particular shame in being the person who has always been dependable and suddenly needing favors, but even that felt better than pretending things were fine. While the car sat in the shop, I kept getting updates from my lawyer. Dad's side tried to argue that I had provoked the event by humiliating Marcus. The lawyer laughed when he relayed that part to me. He said provocation did not erase property damage and that the footage was not helping their narrative. The best part, if there can be a best part in a family disaster, was that the company's HR records also helped. Marcus had not been cheated out of anything. He had not even been in the process in any meaningful way. He had made assumptions, tried to claim space in a job he had not earned, and then escalated into a family incident when reality refused to cooperate. By the time the repair shop called to say my car was ready, the insurance company had already started discussing reimbursement with my father. I only found out because he texted me in a panic asking whether the matter could be handled before it got worse. That text told me something I had suspected for years. Dad had a lot more pride than money. He cared deeply about consequences once they became visible on paper. I told him the same thing I had told him from the beginning. He should have thought about that before destroying my car. A few days later, my mother asked whether I would meet the family for dinner. I almost said no. Then I thought about how much I disliked the idea of them narrating the story without me there, so I went. The dinner was awful in the way only family dinners can be. Nobody knew how to act. Marcus looked angry but drained. Dad looked older. Mom kept jumping in with little attempts to smooth things over. At one point, Marcus finally admitted in front of everyone that he had never actually received any formal interest from the company. That was as close as he came to acknowledging the lie. He framed it as a misunderstanding based on what he had heard through the grapevine. That was classic Marcus. Never a direct confession if a foggy explanation would do. Dad did not apologize at the table. He did, however, ask whether the insurance issue was really going to proceed. I said yes. He looked like he wanted to argue, then thought better of it. That was the first time I saw him actually take me seriously in years. Not because he respected me, because he finally understood I was not bluffing. I was not trying to punish anyone. I was following through. The next month was mostly paperwork, repair receipts, and a slow tightening of the family distance. Marcus stopped calling for a while. Mom became gentler around me, which was both sad and necessary. Dad acted polite in a way that felt forced, like he had learned there were consequences to certain actions and was now testing where the edges were. The insurance company eventually finished its assessment and sent the reimbursement paperwork. My deductible was returned partially through a settlement arrangement once the subrogation claim moved forward against Dad. That was a small financial victory, but it mattered. The car got fixed. The job stabilized. I started saving again. And the best part was not dramatic at all. It was that I could go to work without thinking about whether I needed to defend my own existence first. Then came the final confrontation, which was smaller on the surface but somehow more revealing than the giant one in the driveway. About 2 months after the incident, my dad asked me to meet him at a diner off the highway. I nearly declined. But I was curious, and I had enough distance by then to be careful. He looked uncomfortable the second I sat down. He did not order much. He had that defeated posture people get when they know they have already lost the main argument but are still hoping to salvage their image. He said the insurance premiums had gone up. He said the police report had created trouble with his contractor license renewal. He said the family had been embarrassed. I let him talk. Then he said he wanted to know if I really believed he had done all this over a job. I told him no. I said he had done it because Marcus had spent years living like the world owed him success, and Dad had protected that belief until it became a disaster. I said the job was just the trigger. Dad looked at me for a long time. Then he finally admitted something I had not expected. He said he had always thought I was the one who would be okay no matter what, so he had not realized how much pressure he put on me by expecting me to absorb everything. It was not a full apology. It was not even close. But it was the closest thing to honesty I had ever heard from him. I told him I had spent too many years being the one everybody counted on while no one counted me. I said I was done with that. He nodded like he understood, but I do not think he fully did. Understanding was never his strongest skill. Control was. Still, the conversation mattered because it changed the dynamic, not fixed. Changed. Marcus never did get that position. He applied somewhere else later, and from what I heard, lasted only a few months before quitting after a conflict with management. That did not surprise me. The problem was never one job. It was his relationship to entitlement. As for me, I stayed at the new company. I learned the systems. I got through probation. I started getting asked to train new hires, which felt almost funny because that was exactly the kind of thing I had always been used for in my old life, except now it came with pay and actual appreciation. My family is not magically healed. I wish I could say that. Marcus and I do not talk the way brothers are supposed to. Dad and I keep things civil, which is more than I thought we would manage at first, but still not warm. Mom still tries to keep everyone connected, and sometimes I let her because I know she is trying in her own imperfect way. But the biggest change is internal. I stopped thinking that being calm meant being passive. I stopped confusing endurance with obligation. I also stopped letting people act like my preparedness was some kind of character flaw. The camera on my driveway still works. The folder with the police report still exists. So do the emails, texts, and insurance documents. I almost never look at them now, but I kept them anyway, not out of bitterness, out of memory, because the truth of what happened was simple even if the lead-up was messy. I earned the job. Marcus tried to steal the story. Dad tried to punish me for refusing to surrender. They both underestimated what a paper trail can do when someone finally decides not to blink. And the part that still sticks with me, more than the broken windshield or the police lights, or even my father standing there with a pipe in his hand, is how quickly my own life changed the moment I stopped trying to keep everyone else comfortable. I had spent years believing that being the reasonable one would eventually protect me. It did not. What protected me was staying calm when they expected me to break, keeping records when they expected me to forget, and calling the police when they expected me to take the hit. That is what made the difference. Not revenge, not luck, just the first time I refused to let them rewrite what was right in front of me. And honestly, after everything that happened, I do not think I was the one who got taught a lesson.